Wow, killer.
Killing WoW one episode at a time. Welcome to a brand new episode.
I just wanted the first word, Garrett. I just wanted to be first in the podcast today. And so I was. Welcome to WoW Killer, everyone. It's me, Taliesin, with my special guest. As always, it's Garrett.
I don't know what to do with this bit anymore. It's literally gone on too long. Hi, everyone. I'm back. Taliesin's back. We've gone literally nowhere because we're not allowed to go anywhere. Also, we already work from home, so things aren't that different for us. Welcome back to our...
I don't know about you, but I am very sound of mind right now, Garrett. I'm in a really good place. I'm ready to discuss the discussion that we were discussing last week and continue that discussion into the beefy stuff.
Yes.
What were we talking about last week, Garrett?
We were talking about BFA. We were doing a BFA Postmortem because we are at the end now. There is no new BFA coming. And we figured now is as good a time as ever to look back and ask ourselves the question, was this really as bad as everyone says it is? And I think after last week, we came to the recollection that no, it is not. But yes, it had some problems.
Well, I would posit, Garrett, that we haven't actually got to the problems of BFA yet. I mean, what do we talk about last week? We talked about, the pre-patch and the intro to the expansion, which I think we both agreed was like top draw, top quality. And I will sing the praises of that pre-patch, for the rest of the time.
Yes, but we did also get into Dungeons and Raids, which you more than me had some really poignant points about issues and areas of, let's call it, abrasion that you ran into with Dungeons and Raids, which I thought I didn't disagree with. It's almost like, Taliesin, that the actual shades of gray that were nowhere to be found in the story of this expansion were found in the quality of the mechanics and game systems of this expansion.
I would like to congratulate you for sitting on that excellent soundbite for 2 weeks or a week since last podcast. I mean, you could have put that on Twitter and got a gabillion likes, but you didn't. You sat on it. You saved it for this podcast, and I appreciate it.
I'm going to revel in it even more and tell you that it literally just popped into my head 5 seconds ago.
That was I actually don't believe you. That was Shakespearean. if that had just popped into your head, how come it was all in iambic pentameter? Perfect iambic pentameter. You can go back and listen to that. That's beautiful. So good. It's like a heartbeat.
Wondrous stuff. Well, let's not ruin it by reveling in it too much and get to part 2 of our BFA Postmortem, which means it's time to very slowly peel off the Band-Aid on what will probably be. I'm making a shot call right now. This is going to be the longest discussion of the 3 bullet points we have in the show notes today, which is the Azerite armor and Heart of Azeroth system.
Oh, good.
Good, a nice light conversation that nobody out there has an opinion about. I'm not sure that
this is going to be that much of an in-depth conversation, to be honest with you, Garrett, because I think it's the least controversial part of the entire expansion. I would go as far as to say, and we can get into the details and the hows and the whys, but I would go as far as to say, as I've said on this show before, I believe the Heart of Azeroth to be at the heart of pretty much every problem that BFA has. I think that everything that's wrong with BFA in a major way, not so much maybe gameplay modes that didn't work, but that didn't detract from the game, like Warfronts or Island Expeditions. Because okay, fine, those didn't take off in the way that the devs or the player base would have hoped, but they didn't detract from the game. They didn't take out Mythic Plus dungeons or raids so that they could have Warfronts and Island Expeditions. They were like sort of extra parts of the game, which I didn't like and I didn't really engage with that much. But whatever, they didn't make the game worse, in my opinion. All of the major problems with BFA, for me, can be traced back to the Heart of Azeroth and Azerite armor in particular, more so than the Heart of Azeroth, because the Heart. Let's differentiate between these two things now. In Legion, and I'm sorry to keep on bringing up Legion in these discussions, but I think it's important because Legion was such a good expansion and such a well-received expansion, and particularly after the bad reaction that Warlords of Draenor got, there was a relief around how good Legion was as well. People genuinely enjoyed it as expansion, but there was a sense of relief around how good Legion was. I remember in the BlizzCon, just after Legion had released, and it had been out for just a couple of weeks, a few weeks, because they kind of sort of had it out by then. And the Q&A that year, which was being hosted by Trade Chat, Panzer, and she was fine, but there's been better hosts since, so I hear. There was someone, I remember someone getting to the front of the queue and just saying, before I ask my question, just thank you for Legion. And he got like a huge round of applause. And everyone knew what that questioner meant. Everyone knew what she meant. There was this relief about how good Legion was. And that's before we even knew how great the release schedule was, and how strongly the expansion finished, in my opinion. And most people, I think, were like, awesome, Legion is great. It's introduced loads of cool new things like Mythic Plus and like World Quests, which were very well received when they were first introduced. They sorted out legendaries eventually, and people, quite like those too. And they were like, do you know what? The artifact weapon system worked really, really well, in my opinion, and was a genuinely engaging end game progression system, with lots of potential for taking forward into other expansions. And there was a general feeling, maybe you disagree, but I got this sense that, you know what? If BFA is basically just Legion 2, they could do a whole lot worse. They've sussed it. They've fixed WoW with this expansion, and all BFA has to do is essentially just be a bit of a Legion 2. And to be honest, it kind of was, which is now something that we criticize it for, but it's easy to forget that that's kind of what we were all hoping for at the time. It means it's why so many systems and things about BFA bear comparison with Legion. It's not just something we're doing arbitrarily and just for the sake of it. It's because so many of them are iterations on Legion systems and things like that. So they're worthwhile comparisons, I think.
It's like a band's follow-up record to their breakout success, where they do more or less the same thing a second time, but it just doesn't have the heart in it, even though this literally had the Heart of Azeroth in it. It just doesn't have the same heart. So basically what I'm saying is, I guess I'm saying that Battle for Azeroth is the Insomniac to Legion's Dookie. Yeah. Yes, Green Day reference for my friends out there.
No, I got it.
I mean, I guess really because Legion is kind of like the second coming of World of Warcraft, it'd be more like Legion is American Idiot and Battle for Azeroth is 21st Century Breakdown. But we're not going to go that far.
Sure. And most people liked the artifact system, I think, overall. I certainly did. I thought it was great. And, were wondering how they were going to take that system into BFA, because they clearly were going to.
Yeah, obviously. I from without even looking or paying any attention to follow-up comments about what the Heart of Azeroth system was, Azerite armor, any of that, just hearing that was a thing, I go, oh, I know exactly how this is going to work. And that is not exactly, actually not at all how it ended up working until we got the Essence system, which was much more analogous to how I thought it was going to end up working. And yet Essences came in, but it didn't replace Azerite armor, so we still had this weird bits that Azerite armor had brought into the game. And
that's an important point that you bring up there, I think, is that the Heart of Azeroth system has got a lot better and a lot more what it should have been in the first place since, the Essence system being introduced in 8.2 was major. I feel like if the Essence system had been in place instead of Azerite armor from the start, then this expansion would be a whole lot better remembered. But for me, the problem with the entire expansion was Azerite armor. And it's a bit of a saga that surrounds Azerite armor. So many of the features of Azerite armor were straight off the back designed to be a continuation of the artifact system, but addressing a lot of the complaints that people had about the artifact system. So, people didn't like that with their artifact system, they had to level up a separate artifact for each of the specs on their character, which, if you were a druid, was a right pain in the ass, because you had 4 different artifacts you had to level up separately. you know? And, when they were introducing the Heart of Azeroth, they were like, and the Heart of Azeroth is universal to all of your specs. So you only need to level it up and it will apply to all of your specs. And everyone was like, yeah, Blizz listened. Yeah, woo. And they're like, and there's nothing random about Azerite armor traits. You know, every piece of gear that has the same name will have the same Azerite armor traits on it. So you can go and you can target the traits that you want on the gear that you want. You know where it's going to drop from, and you can go, these are my best traits, and you can target that, and you can get it that way. Not like legendaries, which are random, and people are like, yeah, oh, Blizz, you nailed it. Blizz listened. Oof, wow, brilliant, yay. And yeah, and they were like, oh, and also Azerite Power, when you collect it now, you don't have to click on it to use it. It automatically just all goes into your Heart of Azeroth. It's brilliant. That would be good, won't it? And everyone was like, that will be good. Yeah, woo, woo. And
I mean, that part legitimately was good. It's a very small piece, I think, of the puzzle. But
and also, there's not a tree that you have to fill in for the artifact weapon anymore. From now. You're just like leveling your neck, and that will unlock things on armor. What do you think about that? And people are like, oh, I don't understand that, but that sounds good, yeah. And they're like, yeah, it's gonna be amazing. And like, so you'll have armor with all these different traits on, and it will be just like legendaries, and it'll be just like tier set bonuses, except it'll be stuff that you choose and that you hunt down and that you target. And everyone was like, well, that sounds excellent. And in fairness, all of that was true and is what happened, but was also bad and terrible and wrong and broke the entire expansion. Would you agree with that?
Well, let me just check how much money Blizzard sent me this month. Okay, yeah, that's not enough. Yeah, I agree with you. Very much so. Like this is this is like the coolest, most like room temperature take in the world. I don't think I haven't heard anyone legitimately go to bat for the Azerite armor system, and I agree with them. And as I already mentioned, I don't think Essences really fixed it. It just added, I think, a better system on top of the broken system and left the broken system in place.
And the problem is the broken system, although it's essentially negated now, does undermine the better systems that have been placed on top. And it's something, a criticism that we've heard a lot of in BFA is, which is not an incorrect criticism, but it's also quite a lazy criticism in the respect that, like, BFA is just system after system, like pasted on top of each other. Every new major patch, there's a new system, and it's like,
it is legitimately a lot.
There is. And you're right, that is bad, but that wasn't the plan. Like they didn't sit down and go, this isn't Blizzard's philosophy on BFA. They didn't sit down and go, wouldn't it be great if there's a new system every patch? Essences were a fix to a system that didn't work. There wouldn't have been a new system in place had their original plan worked. Like the ethos of BFA wasn't, let's have a new system every patch. That's just how it turned out, because the original system didn't work. There's probably an argument to be made that the time and dev resources put into the fixes around Azerite armor are the reason why the release schedule has been so terrible for BFA and so much slower than the Legion one.
Oh, it has to be. I mean, we got into this last episode, and nothing. My opinion has not changed from last Wednesday to this Wednesday. Like, I feel the same way. Like, I just don't see a reality where all of this scrambling didn't slow things down.
Yeah. So, I mean, I imagine the Essences had been... Well, okay, before we get to that, actually, we all agree that Azerite armor didn't work, and you agree with me that it's pretty much the main problem of the expansion. Yeah. I would place the slow scheduling of updates as second in the big list of problems from BFA. Well, it's not a big list. Those are the two things, really.
I guess I see them so much as like the same thing, because one, failure of one, like, influences the time it takes to get the other out.
I'm willing to buy that. So which would make Azerite armor the big mistake of BFA. So we all agree it was terrible, but why? Why was Azerite armor so terrible, Garrett?
Well, for one, I mean, it basically took the place of tier gear. Like, in a way, it kind of killed that. It plays at least a role in the staleness of the loot grind from the Mythic Plus system that we talked about last week. Like it kind of, its tendrils, like an old god, kind of spread out throughout most of the systems of the gearing loop of BFA. So if you didn't like it, it didn't matter. You were going to continue to interface with it nonstop for the entire expansion. And it just, for me personally, it just got old. It was boring. I don't, much the same way we spent a long time last episode talking about how gearing through Mythic Plus, it gets stale because you're just trying to get slightly better versions of stuff you've already gotten in the past. And whether it's boring because it looks the same or it's boring because it has the same name, whatever the case is, it's kind of on the boring side. And I think that's the same thing for Azerite armor. Like, yeah, they added new ones in raids and we got some new traits, but like at the end of the day, I don't know. Like granted, I've done this for basically everything over the history of World of Warcraft, but there was something about Azerite armor that was just like, it really felt like the illusion of choice. Because I would just, all right, let's go over to Mr. Robot, plug in my shit, and see what the best traits are, instead of actually going through my options and picking what seemed the most fun or seemed the cool, or actually customizing my character in a way that like made me feel like I had some agency in how I play my tune. When in reality, I was just running sims and selecting the right thing and just do it over and over and over again. It just became laborious. I mean, it still is laborious as I get upgrades.
Yeah. You touched on something quite important there, which is the agency. And I think Azerite Armor was billed as being something. And, I feel like a lot of people they conflate the Azerite grind with the things that are wrong about Azerite armor. And I would say that they're actually two very different things. I would say the Azerite grind, similar to the artifact grind, is actually a really good idea. I know that's not like a universal opinion. I don't think it's an unpopular opinion. I think a lot of people quite like the Azerite grind at its core, in the same way that like the artifact grind. And the artifact grind was maybe a bit more satisfying because it had a path that you could see that you were filling out. Like you were. It was like a talent tree from like vanilla or something like that. You were gaining levels and unlocking bits of a tree. And there was a big gold trait right here at the end that you wanted to get to, and there was a reason for doing that. And those gold traits were often a button press. Those gold traits were often an ability that you would use in your rotation. They were big, those gold traits. They were very important. And there were other traits along the way there. Azerite Armor, it took the grind away from having a set path. And it constantly kind of moved the goalposts for players in a way that the artifact system didn't. Because it would introduce armor, which was like, so this armor, right, it's basically exactly the same as the armor that you're wearing right now, but it's a higher item level. You're still going to want the exact same traits on it, but when you get this one that has the exact same traits on it and is a higher item level, it's basically the same gear you're wearing now, but higher item level. You can't use all the traits because you still got to continue on your, you felt like you were losing power and losing abilities, and that was the one of the problems with Azerite armor, as it turned out, was this idea that you were always catching up again. It wasn't a progression, it was a catch up. Artifact was a progression. You were on a path and you were traveling along that path, and everything you did was progress. Azerite armor, it was a catch up. You were never progressing. You were just trying to get back to the point where you were before, before the new gear was introduced. And that has a lot to do with why people think that they are sick of new gear getting introduced every tier and higher item levels getting introduced every tier, which has always happened throughout WoW. But now you hear people complaining about it, and I think that's entirely down to the sense of Azerite armor of it's not a progression, it's a catch up, and you're always behind because of course you are, because otherwise there would be no point having the system in place in the first place. So there was that. And then there's the fact that the abilities didn't do what they were supposed to do. The abilities in Azerite, the Azerite traits, they did not replace legendaries. They did not replace artifact traits. They weren't button presses that changed your rotation in any way. because there were so many of them in each piece of gear.
Yeah.
That how could they be that important?
Well, for me, I mean, I guess it depended on the tune, but very recently I swapped back over to Paladin and am enjoying World of Warcraft a lot more as a result of it. Like, I finally think I hit one that kind of feels like an artifact trait, which is
sure, with Glimmer.
What?
Oh, no, you're not playing Holy Paladin, I guess, but Glimmer does that.
No. Just me healing, yeah. Please. No, when I'm running around in Ret, Light's Decree, which like gives you free Avenging Wrath, okay. No. What's the one that gives you free Divine Storms? That one's fun as hell. Like, it feels like when you're getting procs and getting extra Divine Storms, like that to me felt like artifact. But again, it's this kind of thing where it's like, well, I'm still gearing, so I may find another piece that doesn't have that on it that's technically better. And of course, next tier, you're going to have to go and get a piece that has that on it again. Otherwise, you lose it. Otherwise, you lose that excellent trait that you've got. Yeah. Which, I'm sorry, that one was Empyrean Power. Light's Decree, I think last time I checked, is the one that Simsei is like infinitely better than the one I actually like using. So it's just, it took them a while, I think, to get there. Maybe that one's been since the beginning. I don't know. I was very late to playing Paladin this expansion, but it doesn't matter because you can still lose it. Whereas like with the artifact, like once you unlocked it, you had it. It was there permanently as you increased in power, as you continue to build your artifact powers. So in that way, I think it's still the permanency of your artifact abilities played better for me. It felt like, well, once I got there, cool, I accomplished it. It's there. I'm not going to lose it. Let's move on. It like almost felt like a baseline, which now I think essences do feel like, but they're also
precisely
they're laborious in their own way.
Like I think essences are like artifact traits, but more so. And I know everyone's got problems with how you catch up essences on alts, which I think is largely solved now with the changes in 8.3. With the account-wide essences, some of which aren't account-wide at all, and some of which are actually like better than account-wide, which is excellent. But okay, so whether or not, like, leaving aside the alt element of essences on your main, which is what I think a system like that should probably be judged on more than anything. Like, I feel it's fair to judge it on how it works on a main and how it works on alt separately. On a main, it's an exquisite system. Like the essence system is brilliant on a main. Like when 8.2 first released, and for those first couple of weeks, you were doing everything. You were engaging in every element of gameplay because you needed to get those essences. And the essences, they feel like good gear that you're targeting and getting. They feel like talents that you're unlocking. They're excellent. Like they're just really, really good, and I'm a big fan. Not the same story when it comes to alts, obviously, but on a main, that's a system which is really great and works amazingly, and still was slightly undermined by how finicky and fussy and overly complicated and ultimately unsatisfying the Azerite armor traits were. So I mean, and it was a major part of why the first two major patches of BFA were underwhelming and probably slow coming. Was because of Azerite armor, because they just didn't do what they were supposed to do. They didn't give people trinket effects or Azerite artifact trait effects or legendary effects. They just didn't do that. They weren't button presses for the most part, with exceptions. And there was nothing that differentiated them really in the raid gear from the Mythic Plus gear. And as someone pointed out in the chat, that whole element of, one of the major selling points of Azerite armor, which was, you can target the pieces that you want because, you'll know what traits are on them and you'll know which pieces you want, which it works in raid, but it doesn't work if your best pieces are in Mythic Plus. And the because then you're going back to that whole difficulty that Mythic Plus has in its gearing, which is a difficulty which we discussed at length last episode. Check it out, WoW Killer fans. And is just exasperated to the nth degree. It's just put into extra sharp focus when it comes to Azerite armor in Mythic Plus. I kind of feel like that's almost not Azerite armor's fault when it comes to how it's doled out in Mythic Plus, because it's kind of, because we discussed the problems about Mythic Plus gearing a lot last week, and it's kind of just an impossible situation. But the fact that the traits are so unsatisfying and so annoying, and you're playing catch up, and you're losing the traits that you've already unlocked whenever, you know, a new tier of gear is released, and what have you, and the things that we had to give up for Mythic Plus to even exist, like tier sets, like legendaries. It overall just leaves a really bad taste in the mouth, and it's a really unsatisfying, really annoying system, which, like I say, is at the heart of everything wrong with BFA, in my opinion. Like, for me, there's not a major problem in BFA that you can't pin down and like trace back to Azerite armor.
I agree. I mean, I'm sure out there, like maybe out there, like maybe really just like Warfronts. So I think some of it's going to come down to personal preference. But yeah, I think considering how many different systems we just talked about while also talking about the Azerite system, that's why that paints the picture of exactly why I think it's so problematic, is because it did just kind of disperse itself out through most of the ways that we loop our World of Warcraft play.
Yeah. And like the problem, the system is so bad that it wouldn't have even been solved by, you're saying, Taliesin, that one of the problems was that the Azerite traits weren't very memorable, or, game changing or rotation changing, and they didn't have trinket effects or artifact effects or something like that. And it's like, yeah, but the problem of Azerite armors was so deeply ingrained that it wouldn't have actually been solved by having traits that were that important. Because so imagine there is like a game changing trait in there, which is your BIS trait, changes your entire rotation. So that's the one you target, and you finally get it, and you're like, kaboom! I've got my BIS Azerite trait. It's a game changer. It changes my rotation, fam. Like, it's like an artifact ability. My rotation is different. It literally changes my playstyle. That's what I wanted. That's what I'm after. Next tier, you're stuck with trying to get that same trait again. You're stuck using all your old armor until you can find new Azerite armor that has that same trait on it again. And if it's that good, then presumably it's going to be on like the later bosses in the raid or something. That's how you get that trait. And it's just going to be incredibly frustrating. You're going to have to do without that trait or not have the pleasure of actually kind of incrementally improving your armor, your Azerite pieces until then. And there's always the chance that when you do get the armor that has that game-changing trait that defines your playstyle in BFA, you haven't got enough Heart of Azeroth power to unlock it anyway. So, I mean, the problems are so at the heart of the system that any one of the problems can't be solved, because there are so many other problems that still make it a problem. It's like, it's just basically trash, Garrett. And, a lot of people blame Azerite armor on a lack of testing in the PTR. This is a common complaint that we've had in BFA, is that, there hasn't been enough testing. And again, it's one of those criticisms which isn't completely untrue. BFA was... Azerite armor was not tested on the PTR. I'm of the camp that believes that the reason that Azerite armor wasn't tested on the PTR, or on the beta, I should say, because it only appeared, the proper Azerite pieces only appeared on the beta a couple of weeks before BFA actually released. And I'm of the opinion that happened because they knew it didn't work. A lot of people say the system didn't work because it wasn't tested and we didn't get a chance to give our feedback and tell them how it didn't work. I don't think that's true. I think they always knew that it didn't work, and that's why they delayed putting onto the PTR, onto the beta. Is that better or worse? I don't think it really matters. I don't think it's better or worse. It's just a cause and effect thing. I don't think they ever thought that Azerite armor worked. And, us telling them it didn't would have dropped the penny for them, and then they'd have been able to fix it before the expansion launched. Like, they knew from the get-go that system didn't work, as far as I'm concerned. And they had the choice. They could either put it out and try and fix it on the fly, or they could delay the entire expansion for 6 months, a year, while they fixed it. And yeah, I guess the expansion would have been better overall, but we'd have had 2 years of 735. And, I think when it comes to MMOs and perpetual games like WoW, like Final Fantasy, like ESO, I think scheduling is a major important part of the quality of the work. I don't think it's like, a standalone game where you're like, oh, no one remembers that a game gets delayed, but you do remember if it's bad, so delay it and make it good. Yeah, that works for standalone games, but it doesn't work for perpetual universes where you're paying a subscription and where you expect regular updates and things. And the scheduling is important. So it's a trickier call for a game like WoW than it would be for Animal Crossing or a new Pokemon game or like a new Mario game or something.
Well, it's the scheduling is important. It's also one of the biggest challenges to the game. Because if you're right, if you don't get it out, if you don't get new content out at a quick enough pace, like people just leave. I mean, I think we're already staring down the barrel of probably too long of a wait until Shadowlands. But I think that's always been true of World of Warcraft. Like I almost always take a break at some point in the lull between the final patch of an expansion and the expansion releasing, because at just a certain point I run out of things to do. My difference right now is I'm actually looking forward to that because I might finally hit 60 in Classic when that happens. But
I always look forward to the lull at the end of an expansion. I've always got stuff to do in the lull. We'll have our lull episode next week, I reckon. We'll do
we're not going straight into gloves off Sylvanas fight.
I'm not. My body's not ready for
Your
that.
body's not ready. I need the world to be in a slightly less tumultuous state to enjoy that debate. That's what I need. That's what I need. Yeah. So I don't know. I have nothing more to add on Azerite. I think we've. I would like just to take the opportunity to clarify that I am not in the camp that believes that an artifact or Azerite grind is de facto a bad thing. Which is probably just as well, because I think we're going to have it in Shadowlands as well. The anima grind certainly sounds like it's going to be a bit like. I didn't love the artifact grind, but I much like this expansion, swapped mains after the second raid, and the artifact grind was a pain in the butt. And the same thing happened here, only it was essences, really, for the most part, that I'm still catching up on. So
yeah,
it's...
Well, since we're talking about gameplay systems, Garrett, what are your opinions on essences as a whole and how they've turned out?
They're better, but they're not interesting enough, in my opinion. I think they're a little on the bland side, and they make me feel like a hypocrite because I like having I really like my shopping list in World of Warcraft. I really like it. I like knowing I can do a certain thing, get a certain piece, and I have now established kind of a gear floor that I can, now it's time to go and just progress and do the progression loop. I really like that. And it's something I feel like World of Warcraft has kind of really gotten away from with its different systems and the way it as it's moved a little bit more towards a Diablo gearing sort of randomization, more on the, I guess, on the Mythic Plus side of things. But I don't know, man. I like haven't swapping to Red Pal and having to go back to the freaking Nazjatar raid, like I'm just don't want to do it. I'm not interested. And yet I realize how hypocritical that is because even though I haven't been over in Classic in a while, I like that I'm at the point over there where I've got my list. I've got my shopping list of like, I'm going to go here and get this crossbow. I'm going to go over here and get these gloves. I'm going to go. So I don't know what it is about essences that I think it's just, they're not interesting enough that I'm excited to go get them.
I also think like some of the acquisitions of essences are super fun. And some of them are okay the first time round, but I mean, having to get to Exalted with some 8.2 reputation, which can only be done by doing dailies with your little bodyguard or whatever, like that is not comparable to the fun that you have going over and doing this quest line to get this crossbow that you need, or farming this boss to hope that this drops, and I've got, a lot of love for the Essence system, but yeah, I'd like less focus on essences as reputation rewards and some more imagination in where those essences actually come from, personally. I like that the 8.3 essences, you get your first one from just doing the intro scenario and the intro quests. I'd like it to be actually tied to a different quest line. I'd like it to be not the opening quests that you would be doing anyway. I'd like to have that decision that you make to go, okay, now I'm going to do the quest line that gives me this essence. It's very kind of passive as it stands at the moment. And I like that there's one that you get from doing like horrific visions. I like that there's one that you're doing from the new raid and things like that. I think that's awesome. But ones that are tied behind reputations are never going to be as fun. And certainly not when you're coming back on an alt.
Yeah, I agree. Also, like,
but then the ones that you get from doing like Mythic Plus and things like that, great, fantastic. I even really like the ones that you get from doing PvP now that I can get them on my alts as well, because none of it is impossible. None of it requires high level play really to get your level 3s. And the ones that you get from doing island expeditions, the ones that you get from doing PvP, the ones that you get from current raid content, and Mythic Plus. Super fun and something that I would encourage more of, which we won't have more of because they're not taking the system into Shadowlands. But hopefully there'll be something reminiscent of that and the best part of it in the kind of the Covenant system.
Mentioning that you need to do freaking islands to get some essences is a bit of a rub for me, and ties back in.
It took me minimum amounts of islands. Like,
I know. It's just that I don't like islands and don't want to do them ever. And so, like, you might as well lock an essence, like a required essence, behind pet battles, something else that I've literally never interfaced with. Because that's like that's where islands are for me. It's like I'm not mad it exists, but I don't want to go do it, and please don't force me to go do it.
Fair.
And that's my rub there, and that's also my rub with the additional systems. Because early in the show you said, well, they're not painful. But if I don't enjoy it and I do have to go do it, that's where negative opinions form. For me.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, it's fair enough. And like I would react the same way if they did put an essence behind pet battles, say.
Yeah,
because it's an area of the game that I've never engaged with. It's an area of the game that I have no desire to engage with. But I tell you something, Garrett. I bet you that if they did do that, I would be like, oh no, get out my face. No way. Now I have to go and do pet battles. Do you know what? I bet I'd enjoy it.
You're going to be the first one queuing up a Pokemon playlist on Spotify.
Whenever the game has made me do things that I didn't want to do, because I'm doing it for a reward, I have always been left. If it's something that I've always avoided in the game, like, PvP arenas, and other things like that, I have always been really glad that I've done it afterwards. I had to do rated battlegrounds because I wanted my cool hot pink recolor of my artifact weapon, of my mage tower artifact for Discipline Priest. I had to go and win 10 rated battlegrounds. I won my first 8 games and I was like, oh, this is easy. Do you know how long it took me to get those last 2 battleground wins for my hot pink appearance? 36 matches.
Oh, I was going to say 34, so I would have been pretty close.
36 matches to win 2 more my final 2 rated battlegrounds. But you know what? Despite the fact that I did not have enough eyes to stab out with forks to represent how frustrated I got with that, I'm glad I did it. And overall, I enjoyed it. And I felt great when I got the appearance. Likewise, my awesome, cool, roly-poly hippo boy that I got from doing arenas, my first ever vicious saddle, that was painful at times, and it's not something I would have done ever, but I was super glad when I did it. And I think I would probably feel the same about pet battles if they made me do it for an essence. I'd probably come out the other side thinking, do you know what? Probably won't ever do that again. But I feel good that I did it, and I got something that I wanted out of it, and yeah, I engaged with a part of the game that I've never engaged with before. So, fair play. But maybe that's just because I don't know, man. I like the game, and you're not even level 60 on classics. So,
I'll be the first to admit I am pretty old man on my porch about what I see as OG WoW systems. Like most of the things that haven't been around since like Wrath of the Lich King, I'm just not interested in. But I also haven't been forced to interface with most of them in the past. And yet here we are in BFA, and I need to, and it annoys me. I really like going to PvP when it's something that I want but isn't required. Like I love farming transmogs out of PvP. I really enjoy it, and it's something that makes me happy to go do. And it's this. It comes in like spurts of like 2 times a year. It's like, oh, I've got some time on my hands in World of Warcraft. I'm gonna go grind Battlegrounds and get these sick pieces of armor that I missed out on. And I really enjoy that. But for some, like the requirement of an essence, and again, that being kind of like a gear floor in my eyes. That's when it becomes a rub, and I go, this feels bad. This feels like they're forcing me into an area of the game that I am just not interested in being a part of. So
my apologies if you can hear my baby crying in the background. By the way, I don't know if my mic's picking it up.
It is, but I mean, it's
people probably thought it was just you.
It's just me. It's just me crying about.
But it's not. It's my baby, and I'm sorry. I locked him in a drawer, but apparently he's escaped. So I don't know.
This is a bit. Do not tweet at us.
Maybe he put his hand out into the fire that I surround the drawer with to keep him in place and burned himself a little bit. So.
Oh my lord.
Maybe he fell into maybe he touched the electric fence. I don't know.
Wow, so either fire way, then a barrier of electric fence.
Yeah, totally, because maybe you use some water to try and put out the fire, and guess what? You use that water to put out the fire, and boom, electric fence, other side, suck on that.
They didn't even go that far in Jurassic Park, man. They didn't take that many.
Well, do you know what? Maybe they should have. Maybe the story of Jurassic Park would have been a whole lot different and safer. Maybe those people didn't have to die, Garrett, if they'd used fire and electric fences. That's all I'm saying. Maybe I looked at Jurassic Park and I was like, hey, you know what they could have done different here? You know what would have kept these dinosaurs in place better? For a start, don't let Chris Pratt go into one of the cages whenever he fancies it like this.
I mean,
fire and electric fences.
You know what they could have done better about Warfronts and Island Expeditions?
Not Adam.
They don't bother me as much, except when I have to do them for essences. But yeah, that's the next thing on the list is Warfronts and Island Expeditions.
Oh, wait, sorry. I'd like to, before we move on from, we've talked about Azerite and we talked about essences. We might as well finish up on the progression gearing systems of 8.3 and BFA, and we might as well touch on corruption while we're here. As the third major.
Oh, we can get through this very quickly. Are you ready?
Go for it.
It's the best thing that happened to gear this entire expansion.
Are you a big fan?
I like it. It's
You're
fun.
Not in the I hate corruption because it's RNG on top of RNG on top of RNG.
It's legitimately fun in my opinion. I think there's some
I agree.
There's cool effects. And for me, that's like the bare minimum we needed to clear, and we didn't clear it on any other gearing system this entire expansion until we got the corruption. There's cool effects that I am interested in.
Now, for me, it shares some of the same problems that Azerite Armor has. That idea of, I can get a low-level piece that has a really good corruption effect on it that I really want. I can then get an objectively better piece of gear that doesn't have the corruption effect that I want on it later on. I'm always like, it doesn't feel satisfying to replace my gear with better gear in that situation. And I'm always essentially trying to find better pieces of gear with the same corruption on again. Except they're not targetable and it's a bit more random. So that's a problem that I find with it. However, I'd agree with you that it's just fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna
like the problems with it are obvious and glaring, but it's just fun though.
I cannot argue with the technical points that you brought up. Yes, that is all true. There's a lot of RNG involved with it, and like any other system in the game, there are correct corruptions that you want that you're kind of going out and chasing. Honestly, at this point, I'm just so beaten down by the technical criticisms of Battle for Azeroth that I no longer give a shit. And I just I'm enjoying corruption.
I think the context is really important here as well, because I totally agree with you. And the thing that's great about corruption for me is that, yeah, it's totally unbalanced. Yeah, it's mad as a box of frogs. But thematically, it works for 8.3. And it's just balls to the wall, stupid, broken fun. And the context of this being 8.3 and the final patch of the expansion is really important here, I feel. Because, yes, in this context, it can be broken, and it can be unbalanced, and it can be stupid, and it can be random, and that's fun. If corruption were the original gearing system in 8.0 instead of Azerite armor, we'd all be saying very different things, and we'd be going, "This is terrible. What's going on?" Like, and I feel like that's an important context, not only in kind of criticizing Azerite armor, but in corruption gear, but also in praising it as well. And I think that a lot of people that have problems with corruption gear, they criticize it as if it were a system that were in place for the entire expansion. And like, yeah, if corruption gear had been there from the start, a lot of these criticisms would be very, applicable. It's random, and it's stupid, and it's broken, and it's unbalanced. But it wasn't. It's here in the final patch where it's kind of okay to have stupid, broken, unbalanced stuff, particularly in the theme of old god madness and just stupidness and just craziness. And I love it. I think it's fantastic. I wouldn't love it if it was introduced in 8.1 or 8.2, but it wasn't. So I can love it.
If it was targetable, I think I would like it, and it would be fine if it was here for the whole thing. But also, in a way, the RNG of it, like, it's, I think, the most successful implementation of what I see as a more Diablo-fied loot system.
Yeah, I get that.
I see it as successful because I think there is a part of it that is legitimately fun.
Well, there's a character building element to it that would work throughout an entire expansion. That kind of balancing the gear pieces that you have, because they have negative effects as well. So you're trying to get as much of the good stuff whilst keeping a check on the bad stuff as well. And that element could totally work throughout an entire expansion as a main gearing system. For sure. But to the extent of the random madness and craziness and brokenness of corruption gear as it is now, which for me is one of the fun things about it, like genuinely, I can accept wouldn't work without an entire expansion, but it didn't have to. So it's kind of silly to criticize him in those terms, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, corruption's a massive success, and it looks cool as well. And yeah, the effects are passive, but they're still super fun.
Yes.
And yeah, I get a lot of pleasure out of corrupted gear.
Yeah, I agree. So let's move on and talk about Warfronts and Island Expeditions, which are very much kind of like categorized in the same place in my mind, same like genre of system.
Oh, for sure.
Which is like not a dungeon, not a raid, not PvP. It's like this kind of extraneous thing that's unique to this expansion, which... trying to think, what the hell does it remind me of in Legion? I honestly don't know. Like, the first thing that pops in my mind is like, this is like scenarios from Mists of Pandaria, which I didn't like at all. But this is probably my favorite of like least favorite extraneous systems in expansions, because they didn't like severely annoy me. They just annoyed me a little bit.
Yeah, and they were. I mean, you didn't unless you are a cutting edge raider, mythic raider who needed to grind islands to get your neck up before even entering the raid. They were completely unmandatory. They were completely optional, and you could do them if you wanted, and you didn't have to do them. Okay, maybe you had to go into them for an afternoon if you wanted your essence later on, in the case of Island Expeditions. But apart from that, and for me, the writing was on the wall with Island Expeditions to a lesser degree, but definitely Warfronts from the announcement, from the BFA announcement. I was hyped on the BFA announcement. It's my first BlizzCon. I was front row with Evertel. There was unfortunately no space for Patrick Bejar to sit with us. He had to go somewhere else. But we were watching, and it was an amazing cinematic announcement with the cinematic and the features trailer, which didn't usually happen. That was the kind of the first time with BFA that you got both of those things at the same time. People forget that. It was such a big announcement. It was coming off the back of Legion. Everyone was really excited. There was so much to get excited about in that BFA announcement. But even then, it was like, Warfronts, what are they? I think they're probably going to be bad. And I've got the receipts, man.
And
I was on Pixels with Patrick Bejar and Scott Johnson live at that BlizzCon with Evertel, and I said it then. I've got the receipts. I was like, I think no for Warfronts, and to a lesser degree, Island Expeditions, because for me, it was clear that Blizz didn't know what they were. And the worrying thing is you could probably say the same about a lot of Shadowlands features at this point as well. They kind of remind me of Warfronts to a certain degree, except they're a bit more important. Something like Torghast, certainly when it was announced, less so now that we've had Horrific Visions, which you sense is kind of a bit of a dry run for Torghast in a certain way. But also the Covenant system as well. They feel like things like, I feel the same way about them that I felt about Warfronts, which was, I don't think Blizz know what this is supposed to be yet. And that doesn't feel, that means I don't know what they're supposed to be.
That lasted up until like it hit the game. I remember the trailer before the Warfront launch. We were still like, wait, what is this? Is it PvP? It sounds like PvP.
Yeah, I mean, well, and that's the thing. Everyone thought it was PvP. I remember, I remember the weeks after that BlizzCon, the most common conversation I had with players of World of Warcraft was correcting them that Warfronts weren't PvP. You know, people thought BFA was a flat out PvP expansion when it was first announced. Like after that trailer, and with the talk of Warfronts and things like that, I remember like so many people were like, "Oh, it's a PvP expansion." And it's like, no.
I think it's a fair assessment because of the addition of War Mode, which is like it's completely changed the way we world PvP.
Yeah, but I don't think people even really understood War Mode then either. So like the general kind of feeling about BFA for the I don't want to say uneducated because it sounds bad, but you know, the people who weren't, you know, sort of in the middle of all the news like we were, there was a feeling that it's a PvP expansion, and I think that kind of bled out into how people thought about Warfronts. I think people assumed that they were going to be PvP, and you know, I think it's one of those things where it was a nice idea. They were like, "Hey, cool, let's basically recreate Warcraft 3, but you know, it's in WoW, and it's that." And they went, "That sounds good. Go ahead and make it work." And they just never really made it work.
Something about them that I think are inherently cool, but I don't know what I would do to make them actually cool.
I do.
What?
For me, the answer is obvious. Like, Warfronts should be scenarios. Warfronts should be single-play scenarios. Like, the first time you do Stromgarde, it's amazing. Like, it's brilliant. Like, it doesn't matter that you can't lose it because it's like you are doing a big attack on Stromgarde. And it's super fun. And there are armies, and there are like 1 million NPCs, but also 1 million players. And there are like catapults firing fire at the wall, and then the gates break, and then you all run in, and you're like, you know, you're cutting wood and stuff, and you're making things, and you're going in. And if you did it once, your mind would be blown, just like it is in Lordaeron. And like the Battle of Lordaeron is brilliant because you do it once. Per character or per account. I've never done it more than once. And it's fantastic. I went back and did Battle of Lordaeron on a character for the first time in their leveling journey just recently, and it's so good. It's so good. And if Stromgarde happened as part of the war campaign, as like the climax to a storyline, and if Darkshore happened once as a multiplayer scenario like Lordaeron, they would just be amazing set pieces, which are just story delivery devices. The problem with Warfronts is that they're repeatable. And of course they are, because the amount of work that goes into them, you'd never have them just happen once. That's okay for a huge pre-patch event like Lordaeron, but you know, you're not going to put all that work into Darkshore and Stromgarde and not have them repeatable. But that's how they would have worked, and that's how they would have been good.
I mean, what if we just made them Wintergrasp? Like we just had multiple Wintergrasps over the course of an expansion, because the problem is that they would just never end. If they were PvP, they're not balanced. They're not supposed to be balanced. Like the attacking side will always win. That's the whole point. And there's you know, that's why they've never been PvP enabled, and that's why they never would be. Is because they're not built for it. That's not what they're designed to be. They're designed to be things that you... although you couldn't go in with a full guild group when they were first released either, which was stupid. You couldn't even do it as a guild activity. You know, you couldn't go in with like just 20 guildies. Yeah,
which was insane. Insane. So people were like, well, at least we can just go in and do it as a guild. It's like, no, you can't.
You're just very much making me think of Wintergrasp with your talk about like it's cool because it's this massive attack on like a structure, and that's what Wintergrasp was. It wasn't exactly you didn't have the boss fight at the end, but you did if you won, you unlocked access to a very small raid, so you still got your boss fight in that way with a system like Wintergrasp. So
No, it's fair. It's fair. I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Because like Stromguard, you could just about make PvP if you wanted. The Battle for Darkshore is so very much a storytelling device that, I mean, the defending side in that doesn't even gather resources. Like they don't need to build anything even. They have no reason to collect resources or anything like that. So, I mean, they're very, very specifically designed to be one-sided.
Yeah.
And again, you could argue that's a flaw in their concept, but I would argue that they should have just been scenarios as part of the storyline, in which case people would be like, do you remember when we did the Battle of Darkshore? That was amazing. That was so good. I did it on multiple characters. It was so great. But when you're waiting for it to
then it would be, I mean, then it's basically like the Wrathgate scenario, which we still look back on extremely fondly. It was this very cool thing that you did once, and they straight up removed from the game at a certain point.
Stromguard was amazing first time you did it. Battle for Darkshore was brilliant first time you did it. It just didn't work as repeatable content.
I think it's a fair assessment. Although,
so it shouldn't have been. Island expeditions, on the other hand, have a completely 100% different problem, as far as I'm concerned. I get that for me, the fun of them comes from the fact that they are essentially timed, and you're against another team. It doesn't help that the AI of that team is awful. Like Blizzard's AI is not good yet. Those AI teams that you play against on Island expeditions, they are more interesting than standard NPCs and mobs, but I mean they're not. You'd never mistake them for real players. Ever. No. PvP islands are brutal.
The first few times I did Island Expeditions, I remember being legitimately impressed by the AI of the other players. Like the fact that they had like CC removing abilities and cooldowns and would like run away from a fight that started to go bad. Like that was cool. And they would like kite you. And like I kind of look at that, I'm like, can we introduce a little bit of this to like trash in dungeons and maybe have less trash, but trash that actually kind of like runs from you, and you kind of got to do this pseudo PvP dance. But that's whatever. I feel like I dumped on Islands a lot. I want to defend the AI a little bit. I think it's cool.
Can I make a hot take on Islands?
I mean, that is legitimately why we're here.
I would argue that Islands are a prime example, probably the strongest example in BFA, of a system that got changed in a bad way because of the complaints and feedback from the 1% of top players. Whenever I talk about islands and the problems with islands, I can guarantee that in the chat, there's going to be lots of people that go, there should have been more exploring. There should have been like more kind of wandering around and finding new things.
We have it right now in the chat room at this exact moment.
Like, I can guarantee that's going to happen. And it's easy to forget that was the initial concept with islands. They were a lot more slower paced and explory, and when they were first introduced, like mobs were more spaced out. There was a greater emphasis on finding the secret things to do and the little events to do, and less emphasis on just pulling everything in the island and zapping it down, and not even bothering with the other team. And that would have been fine, except the top 1% of players, understandably, because they found themselves in a position where they had to grind hundreds of these mofos every single week. That's not interesting to them. When you have to grind hundreds of island expeditions a week, you don't want it to be explory focused. You don't want like the vagaries of having to find the events. You want to be able to get in there. You want to be able to pull everything. You want to be able to zap it down. You want to get this shit done. You want to be able to move on because this is your job. You don't want to be doing this. You're going in and you're having to get it done like as efficiently as possible. I remember the complaints about islands in the first few weeks, watching like not just the top 1%, like the Mythic Raiders and stuff, but people who by necessity had to play a lot of islands for their content as well. So people like Asmongold and stuff like that as well, who were doing it more than any normal player would reasonably do. Or want to do. And all the criticisms were the same. It's like, why are there mobs that are so much easier to fight than others? Like, it's stupid that these crocodile mobs have like a cone attack and other mobs don't have this cone attack. It's like objectively better to go hunting down for the other mobs rather than just fight the crocodiles if you're there. And it was like, yeah, that's the point. Like, yeah, avoid the crocodiles. Go and find the other things. Like, don't just pull everything and try and zap it all down. Yes, some mobs are easier to fight than others. And like, and that's part of the focus on exploration and finding the best bits about the island and how they're different. And because of that feedback from the top players who were coming at islands not from a viewpoint of wanting to explore and wanting it to be different every time and wanting, you know, like those variables in there, who approached the gameplay system because they were being forced to, because it was the best way to get Azerite power. So you could still blame Blizz for this if you want, because they were approaching it as like a factory line, like a production line, just to get as much Azerite armor as they could. They just wanted like a much more standard experience. They wanted to get in there and they wanted it to be much more standardized. And that's what Blizz did. So yeah, now islands are literally, you just go in there. There's very little difference. If you're doing like the Panda Island, and then if you get the Panda Island again for your next island expedition, you're gonna have pretty much the same experience. There's very little that could be different. People forget that wasn't how islands were at the very start. Those were changes that were implemented to islands because of the criticisms and feedback of like a very small subsection of players who were being forced to farm that more than any reasonable player should.
Now, part of the issue could also...
I'm not saying the blame is with them. I completely understand where they're coming from. They were being forced into this gameplay loop by the fact that it was the best way of getting Azerite power.
Right,
so,
right.
Like you can blame Blizzard for it.
I'm curious why that wasn't the angle then that was addressed, like capping how much Azerite power you could get from it, or just removing Azerite power from it entirely. And
yeah,
the carrot on the end of the stick could have been adjusted. It could have been a different carrot. It could have been a smaller carrot. It could have been a carrot with a cap. That's where my brain goes with it, because yeah, I agree with Chad and that popular comment that it should have been more exploratory, should have been like given time to breathe, because for me that's exactly why I just kind of got bored with it. It just became a less interesting version of chain running dungeons, of just pull everything, kill it as efficiently as you can. Yeah. Let's go so we can get, you know, more runs in. That's I already have that in dungeons, and the boss fights are usually more interesting in dungeons. Yeah. You know, we ran into you would run into randomly more or semi-randomly more powerful mobs, but their move set wasn't as interesting as like a boss in a dungeon. So yeah, that for me, that's where it kind of fell. Cause like out the game, like my first few island runs, like I enjoyed them, and then I very quickly just kind of never went back and didn't really think about it again.
Yeah. And that's the approach I took. And then, but then I have to say, in the 3 islands that I did a week, to just maximize my Azerite power, which kept me nicely up to date. Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed that as a result. You know, I went in with a couple of people from my guild or from my stream, and I'd do my 3. It would take me like 20 minutes. I'd enjoy just going in there and blasting stuff and mindlessly just like super accelerated world quests, essentially. You know, you go in and you'd run around, and people talk about the timer on islands. I think that's kind of important. I mean, it's a soft timer because it's the other team collecting stuff. So, I mean, if you really wanted to just explore the island, you could have one person just making sure that they killed the other team and stopped them from getting any Azerite, which you can do. It's so easy. And the others, you can go and explore as much as they like. There's just no reason to do that. I would have liked to have seen like much more variables put in there, which they kind of did with the Azerite extractor and things like that. I'd like to have seen like a tower defense option in there, you know, where the way to win this island really was to have control of the tower for the longest amount of time.
That's interesting, because that's where I think about tower defense for Warfronts, that they leaned more heavily into that direction. That would have been like, obviously my first thought with Warfronts and how to improve it is like lean more into the Winter Grasp and PvP aspect of it, and less make it a PvE boss thing. But the other direction is tower defense, because that's another thing I think it could be replayable. I historically am not the biggest tower defense fan in the world, but that seemed like something that could have very much existed and already does a little bit more.
Like an obvious thing, didn't it? And like Another obvious thing would have been, there are two big monsters, and you feed them stuff that you collect in the island, and whoever gets their monster up first has like a massive advantage because they're just going to wreck the other team. And stuff like that, and standard MOBA stuff really that you could have put in there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just Island Expeditions are kind of weird. Like, I don't inherently hate them. Which I did with scenarios, which I think we talked about on a much older episode of this podcast, which has only been around for 11 episodes. But they're just funky. They just became, they started to encroach too much on dungeon territory in the way that we move through them.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong.
I just don't think they were unique. They did not become unique enough. I think too.
I think they could have. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the rewards that were connected to them felt incredibly random because they were. I think having there's Azurite that you're collecting on the island, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. But what if hidden in caves there were a different currency, like crystals that you collected, and that's what gave you your rewards, like your cosmetic rewards and your mounts and things from Island Expeditions. So, because at the moment it's all connected, you just go in there, you get as much Azurite as you possibly can, you win the game, maybe you'll get a cool mount or something from it. Well, what if you could go out of your way from collecting Azurite and take that risk to collect mount crystals so you could get the mount that you were after or something like that, or I don't know, whatever. But yeah, just they like Warfronts, they were a game design mode that didn't have a purpose, and the kind of purpose of them being the best way to get Azurite power was kind of pasted on top of them to give them a purpose, but that purpose didn't really fit with the actual game mode. So because that giving them that purpose, going, there's no real reason to do these, so it's the best way to get Azurite power. It actually undermined the entire game mode, because then, of course, you had the top 1% farming them literally hundreds of times a week, and therefore wanting something else from them than what they were originally supposed to be. Yeah, they didn't work. But they're harmless, and they could so easily have worked. For me, the Warfronts fix is so obvious, just make them scenarios. And the Island Expedition fix is less obvious, but having said that, I've still got enjoyment out of them. This expansion, for me, the expansion, because I've never had to farm them for weeks on end, it would have been a weaker expansion had Island Expeditions not been a feature. Not much of a weaker expansion, but overall, I preferred having those 3 islands to do every week than not.
My closing thoughts on Island Expeditions is that there's something there, but it hasn't been found. There's something interesting there. There's something interesting you can do with this, and we haven't reached that destination yet.
Truth.
But
I'm very wary of criticizing an idea that was a new thing that was tried and didn't work, but which didn't ruin the game either. The game wouldn't be any better if islands weren't in it.
The grumpiest I get is, don't make me go do Island Expeditions for essences, and it's a rather minor gripe for me. That's not at the tip top. That is not Azurite level of, this ruined the expansion. It's just a minor thing where I'm I'd rather not.
Yeah.
So
and Deacons correctly points out in the chat there, the fun version of islands is there. They're PvP islands. Which are brutal and also suffer from not having an auto queue. Like Mythic Islands, you have to be in a pre-made group to go into them. So, I mean, that as a game mode was never going to take off. You put an auto queue for PvP islands, there's a lot of fun to be had there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we got into this a decent bit last week when we talked about just the leveling experience and zones. But the final bullet point to discuss is the overall lore and story of BFA.
Oh gosh, right, okay.
Yeah. So,
just a small little thing like that.
We can go light on this because I do think we got into it a decent amount while talking about the leveling experience.
Oh gosh, I think we did actually. We did a lot.
Yeah. But if there's anything else you wanted to add, or if you just wanted to publicly announce your love for Jaina one more time.
I don't think I have to
do it.
Like, there's a poster of Jaina behind my head, and there's a statue of Jaina on my shoulder.
A $600 statue over your shoulder.
It's a $300.
Oh, is it
yeah, it's £300. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's 150 now. It got reduced quite quickly.
Going over to the Blizzard store.
But it is beautiful, and I love it very much. I think the story was great, and I think the story delivery in BFA was great. The war campaign, I enjoyed, particularly in the initial leveling experience. I loved the fact that there was a different one for Horde and Alliance. I feel like the player choice elements of the war campaign, like where you chose to side with Saurfang or stay loyal to Sylvanas, were a really neat thing, and I think could have been played with a lot more, and I think will be in the future. But I think the payoff from them was adequate, and fills me with hope that as a kind of a system and a way of telling the story in WoW will be a thing now. I feel like the Sylvanas kind of quest line, and the way the Loyalists, I should say, quest line, and the way that you literally had different quests to do in 8.2.5 in the Siege of Orgrimmar 2.0, and then you got that neat little cinematic with Sylvanas at the end of it all. I think that was totally worth it, and I think that was really, really cool. And there wasn't such a payoff for keeping my eye hat on all the way through expansion, which I would have really liked. And I feel betrayed and cheated by that. Those of you who don't know, I've kept the Gift of N'Zoth on the entire time because
it has been a running part of your YouTube content for a year.
Yeah. And then when the Sylvanas Loyalist questline happened and the cinematic happened there, the in-game cutscene, I should say, not cinematic, I was like, yes, I get a payoff like that for keeping N'Zoth's eye hat on. That's going to be amazing. That's exactly what I want. I didn't need an in-game cinematic where me and N'Zoth are sitting down for tea, and he's like, "You were always my favorite."
It really does sound like you want your
I
Mass
didn't
Effect.
need that, but I needed something a bit like that. I just needed something. Do you know what? All it would have taken, if you kill N'Zoth with the Gift of N'Zoth on, which, don't forget, you can be wearing as a toy, okay? You don't have to have actually kept the Gift of N'Zoth on. Anyone could have done this. It would have been better if only cool kids like me who had kept it on the entire time could do it. But if you kill N'Zoth with that hat on, why couldn't you just have like an area right at the very back of the Chamber of the Heart? You know how like in the Emerald Dream raid, in the Emerald Nightmare raid in Legion, there you finish that raid.
Oh, the cave?
And yeah, that one.
Yeah.
And then if you were a shadow priest,
With Xalatan,
you could go into a cave and there's a little seedling there, and your dagger, your knife, would talk to you about it. And then this expansion, you came back and you saw the thing had grown there. It was really cool. That's all it needed, was a little Easter egg like that. Somewhere in the back of the Chamber of the Heart, there was like a kind of a dying eyeball or a fish. Oh, there was a little fish flapping around on the floor, and you went up to it, and like the fish is like, "Thank you, my child, for believing in me." Blah blah blah. You no longer need to wear this hat because I need permission to take that hat off still. Otherwise, I'm never taking it off. But thank you, and N'Zoth will remember this or something like that. That's all it needed. I got nothing. I feel cheated and bad, Garrett, because of that. But generally, I think those kind of player choice elements of BFA worked really well, and that fills me with hope that there'll be more like it in the future.
I was such a naysayer and was like, "Oh, this isn't gonna matter." I was going through that stuff like, "Oh, I can pick if I'm loyal to Sylvanas or not." Like, they're not gonna do jack with that. I was totally wrong. They did a very good job with that. I do, however, I find it really interesting that you are so over the moon with one unique quest for Sylvanas loyalists, and yet didn't think Order Hall campaigns were all that interesting in Legion.
Well, because there's no choice in Order Hall campaigns. That's just something that you do if you are a priest or a paladin or a death knight.
So much unique content, though.
And you don't do them if you're not a priest or a death. And like we said last week, there's actually a whole lot more similarities between those Order Hall campaigns than you're giving credit to. I think like the war campaigns for Horde and Alliance are much more different from each other and much more varied than the different Order Hall campaigns.
That's two versus...
For obvious reasons, yeah. And that's the choice they made. But the exciting thing about the Sylvanas Loyalist stuff is not that it's different, it's that it's different depending on what you do. Like, there's nothing like that in the Order Hall campaigns or the War campaign, apart from the Saurfang stuff. Like, you complete the Order Hall campaign or you don't. The story is the same either way. Like, that's the only choice you have. Like, do you do it or not?
I guess I'm thinking of like how many more unique quest lines there are.
Yeah, but I mean, that's not really what we're talking about. And like, the theory is that you'll get that with Covenants as well. You know, there are going to be 4 different storylines throughout the expansion in Covenants and Shadowlands. But the exciting thing about the Sylvanas stuff is it was a choice you made, and you were picking a side. And it was the same quest line, but it was a different branch of the same quest line. And that was the exciting thing about it. You know, it wasn't, you know, and it was a unique choice that you made. You know, you go and do the Death Knight Order Hall campaign. You're going to see all of the story of the Death Knight Order Hall campaign. There's not a choice you can make,
and it's amazing.
Where you're only going to see half of it. No, but that's what I mean, and that's exciting. Like, if there was a choice you made, what if in the Death Knight campaign there was a choice where you just decided not to raise one of the 4 horsemen, and there from there on in there was a different branch of the storyline. Like, that's the comparison. You know, if you want to make it, there's the comparison, because that's what happened in.
Well, I think that's quite problematic from a lore aspect, and having sure. When I go to my Wowpedia page, who actually did the Death Knights raise? And that's what I think is actually pretty damn.
But no, because obviously, like the Order Hall would still raise those people. You had just made a stand against it, and like it's same with the Sylvanas campaign. Like, the story was the same. Like, Sylvanas had a strop outside the gates of Orgrimmar and effed off. Like, the difference was you were able to, in this massively multiplayer online role-playing game, you were able to role-play a bit, and you were able to make a choice, and it didn't affect like the outcome, but it affected your role in the story.
Yeah, which I really liked, and that's really smart.
And your role in the Order Hall campaigns is always going to be exactly the same. Like most WoW storylines, it is completely dictated to you. Whereas that one strand of the War campaign, you were able to choose your path. You know, you ended up in the same place, but there was a big enough difference in the experience to make it worthwhile, I think.
Well, it was unique to you, and the only way you found out like what happened the other way is if like you went to like a Wowpedia and just read what happened, right? So it's,
yeah, but that's fine.
No, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just adding on. No, I think they did a really good job with. Like I said, I was like poo-pooing all over, like, oh, they're not going to do jack with this, and then they totally proved me wrong, and I think they did. That was a really cool addition. It was such a nice touch. Like you said, it was nice to have a little role play in my MMO role-playing game.
Yes, and I think that the signs are that there's going to be a renewed focus on that in Shadowlands, and that's my hope.
I hope so. I would have to imagine they're looking at that being like, oh, this was rather successful, and it seems players really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So why not? Yeah. Why not explore it more? And I really hope they do. So, but yeah, overall, I like the story of BFA. There's one very obvious arc that I have a problem with, but overall, I thought the Alliance story was great. I thought the Horde story was great. And the War campaign will just have to be its own damn episode when we do a Sylvanas episode at some point. But yeah, I again, overall, like, I know, like, when we talked about it, I'm like, oh yeah, if I were to rank the expansions, I think BFA is above Draenor, is my least favorite expansion. But that, like you, I still have a good time when I have played WoW really at any point in its history. Even Draenor in the beginning. Draenor is the closest thing to me just straight up not enjoying World of Warcraft I've ever experienced. But when I say that like BFA is probably second from the bottom for expenses for me, I still have had a lot of fun playing this expansion.
Yeah, I've had a ball. I had a great time. So as like an epilogue, as a rounding up of the BFA roundup, what would you say? Because I'm not going to do both sides of this, because I think we all know, we've discussed in depth what we think failed. What was your single best experience or memory from Battle for Azeroth?
Stepping into Nazjatar for the first time.
Ooh.
I'm all about the
Nice.
zones, man. I'm all about that aesthetic life. And seeing Najatar for the first time, it is, I think, one of the greatest accomplishments in zone design in the history of an MMO that has consumed my life. That I think has very good zone design and is very good with its art direction, its environments, and just telling a story through visuals that you just walk around in. The World of Warcraft world builders are some of the best theme park set designers in the world. And Najatar is, I think Najatar is up there with things like Galaxy's Edge and the Harry Potter parks in terms of how much they blow my freaking mind when I'm standing inside them.
Nice. I like Najatar too. For me, it was just the whole Borealis experience. For me, it was the whole Tiragard sound experience. I have never seen like an in-game city that kind of I recognized like I did Borealis, not just in its, you know, architecture and its general feel, but just in the way that it worked as a city with its different districts that weren't kind of, they didn't have different colored roofs to say this is the Dwarven district or this is the Mage district, but you could tell when you were in the posh area and you could tell when you're in like the slum area, and it just felt like a real city, and the way it bled out into its surroundings felt real. And just that moment as I was doing like a Jaina quest right at the very beginning, which I was thoroughly enjoying, and being part of that whole like family drama for the Proudmoors, which I thought was incredibly well done. And I just ran up, I was on my way to the Norwington estate or whatever, and I just ran up a hill and I looked out over this valley with Norwington estate in the distance there, and it was just it felt like playing The Witcher, you know, but it wasn't. It was better because it was WoW, and I was like, oh god, this is so great. I love this. And the same when I was running up the mountain in Drustvar and just came across the whole like town at the top of the mountain, where the Order of the Embers then assembled as part of that storyline as well. And I like, yeah, just the narrative kind of peaks in this expansion for me were incredibly well done and really, really satisfying, is what I would say. And ain't nobody can take that away from me, Garrett.
I agree. Doesn't matter how many damn really bombastic thumbnails you throw on your YouTube videos, you cannot take this away from me.
No. I would as part of that as well. I now I'm just remembering all cool parts of the plot, but the 815 kind of storyline, which was like the attack on the Bloodgate and stuff from the Alliance, when the Alliance forces were kind of gathering, and you had the Night Elf forces in their really absurdly sexy armor. I say armor, they were bits of string, which
by the way, for both genders.
Yeah, that was the glorious thing about it.
Oh, it's so good.
If it just been the girls, you'd have been within your rights to be a bit like, because it was the boys as well.
Like,
You're this is amazing.
No.
This is why equality is important. It's not so we can take away people wearing sexy armor. It's so everyone gets the
sexy armor. This, by the way, is something that was proven in Heroes of the Storm. This is why we all think Malfurion is lame. His beard covers up his sexiest feature, because there are skins in Heroes of the Storm where Malfurion has his beard cut, and oh yeah, Malfurion is cut. Yeah. He is that druid, that birdman is carved from marble.
Especially if he's missing the chicken feathers on his arms as well. That's going to be helpful too. Actually, well, there we go.
I think the skin I'm thinking of, because they have one where he looks like bad fire druid man from Firelands. Fandral Stagholm. There's a fiery Malfurion version in Heroes, but he has a short beard. Anyway, sorry.
The attack on the Bloodgate was great as well, and all the kind of whenever like big forces are moving in BFA, it's fun. And like the proliferation of cinematics, I thought was fantastic as well, and the new highs and in quality and quantity.
Even some of the janky in-game ones, like I really liked the lead in to Uldir. It's like there's a lot there's janky in-game cutscenes, but ascending the ziggurat and like having the fight at the top and leading into the first dungeon, which I know we're all sick of running it at this point, but
yeah, I really liked all of that. There's very little of, again, I'd hate to go back to the leveling experience, but there's really little through leveling experience that I didn't absolutely love. They just did such a good damn job with the races and the culture they decided to put into the spotlight for this expansion. And again, probably second place to like going to Nazjatar for the first time for me is just like how much they made me give a damn about the Zandalar.
Yeah.
Because I was going to this expansion being like, I am so done with dinosaur trolls. I've seen them enough. I love dinosaurs. I love trolls, but I've seen them enough. And yet I thought they did an amazing job.
Yeah.
And also,
my worry, one of my many worries for Shadowlands is that they're going to find it very difficult to replicate those things that I really liked about BFA. The way that the zones kind of fed into each other and that sense of place and connection between the 3 zones on each continent, which really, Shadowlands presumably isn't going to have.
I really hope they just don't like port through them. I hope there's a meeting of the realms and seeing like the terrain blend into each other. And
totally, but I can't really see any other way that it's going to work. So I don't know. I guess that's something we'll have to
I
wait
just
and
told
see,
you.
but
I solved it. I should be an art director over there because I just told you the way it should work. The zones should clash and it should look like these 2 very different versions of undeath just bashing into each other.
Oh wow, like tectonic plates.
Yes.
Just kind of like
how I expected
cool.
Battlegrounds and Heroes of the Storm to look like, but it took them forever to actually start bringing in Blizzard IP as Battlegrounds.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, you're welcome, Taliesin. I just did, and you're welcome, Blizzard. I just solved it for you. So if you're not already doing that, I hope you can make it happen very quickly.
Well, I'm glad that we finally got to the bottom of BFA and we never need to talk about it ever again.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Of course we will. That's insane. But
well, there's nothing else to talk about, to be honest. So we're gonna have to.
Yeah, we're done with the show until we both hit 60 in classic.
No, unfortunately, we've got plenty more to talk about. So
yes.
I look forward to all of that. But for now, I think that is the end of our BFA wrap up.
That it is. Folks, as we wind down, if you'd like to be a part of the show, if you'd like to write in, if you have a hot take, if you have a question, if you have a topic you would like us to, if you'd like to pitch us a topic, you'd like to do our job for us.
Oh, yeah, that'd be really good, actually.
Pitch an episode topic. Write in wowkillercast@gmail.com. That's where you can write into the show, be a part of it. We do mailbag episodes from time to time.
We'll probably do a mailbag episode, actually. We've only done one.
We have only done one, and we are at the end. Actually, technically, we didn't get one in this month, but also we missed episodes this month. So
we did, and that was my baby's fault. Blame my stupid baby.
How dare you have a major life experience and become a father? How
gutted
dare you? You casual.
I know. If I'd known it was going to impact on WoW Killer so much, I probably wouldn't have bothered.
Well, you should have.
My apologies.
You should have really thought about your priorities.
That's what I should have done.
But write us, WowKillerCast.
I'll bear that in mind for the next child.
Write us, folks. WowKillerCast@gmail.com.
While WoW Killer's going on.
And if you're listening to this on audio and you're thinking, boy, I'd like to stare at their weird faces, Taliesin always looking nice and well put together because he has been awake so many more hours than I have by the time we start recording this podcast. I literally roll out of bed and start this podcast. So if you'd like to see Florida Hobo and Dapper English Gentleman, our faces, doing a podcast, you can go to youtube.com/wowkiller. Go and subscribe there if you'd rather get this through a YouTube means. And before we leave, Taliesin, if somehow World of Warcraft fans out there are not aware of the YouTube empire of WoW content that you run, where can people find you?
You can go onto any old platform, basically, and search for Taliesin and Evertel. You will find us on YouTube. That's where I like it when people find us. You can find us on Twitch. We've had 1 million views on Twitch now, which is, I mean, we've had 60 million on YouTube, but there's no big deal. But on Twitch, we've had 1 million views, which felt like a big milestone for us just this week. So, because we haven't been doing Twitch very long, but that was really good. So we're happy about that. And you can find us on Twitter for hot takes on Twitter. All the time, tweeting like no one's business. Taliesin and Evertel, find us. You can probably put our name into the forums as well if you want to find people slagging us off.
We're very, very angry about things. Folks, you can find me on Twitter.
Where can we find you, Garrett?
As I was saying, you can find me on Twitter @GarrettArt. 2 R's and 2 T's and Garrett. I trust you know how to spell art. I don't even know why I still have art in the name. I don't really advertise my graphic design services that much. But frankly, now that I mentioned, if you're interested, go to nomoonart.com because no one can spell Garrett Weinzierl. Go to nomoonart.com. You can see my graphic design work. You can hire me there. At some point, I'm going to get a reel up since I actually do more video editing nowadays than graphic design. But whatever. That's neither here nor there. amove.tv for all the podcasts, though. If you want to keep up with mostly Blizzard podcasts. Also, Let's Talk About Star Wars is back because Clone Wars is back, the greatest thing ever created in the history of Star Wars. So we'll be talking about that week to week. And lots of Angry Chicken. Go subscribe to the Angry Chicken because so much Hearthstone junk is coming down the pipeline at us. I don't know why I called it junk. It's insane. We're getting a new class, which we literally never thought we were going to get. I guess they lied to us when they said they weren't going to do that. It's insane. We did a 3-hour episode last week. Want to go check that out, go check it out. We're back tonight with a brand new Angry Chicken. Regis Kilbin will be joining us as a guest. And there's just a lot of Hearthstone going on. So go check it out. amove.tv for all the podcasts. Thanks for visiting. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of WoW Killer. So until next time, good luck and have fun, everyone.
WoW Killer.
Sounds like... Is that to the tune?
That's how we started the episodes.
Is that to the tune of Goldfinger? Are you doing like the Goldfinger James Bond?
Yes.
Okay.
WoW Killer. It's the show with Garrett Art and Taliesin.
Yeah.
And WoW is dead. WoW Killer.
I'm going to keep that in the podcast.
WoW Killer.